I'm Alec. Like the title says, I'm currently under house arrest. The specifics as to why I'm under house arrest, I won't say due to privacy concerns. Privacy has been a particularly rare commodity for me as of late. I started my sentence 2 months ago. About a week, and I woke up one morning. And well, he was there. I don't know who he is, what he is, or even why he is. Despite how little I know about him, he seems to already know just about everything about me there is to know. I don't know how he knows half of the things he does. If he has a name, he won't tell me it. Since he showed up, I've just been calling him Warden. At first it was just a joke given my current predicament with the ankle monitor and all. But, as time has gone on, that moniker has turned into a much crueler joke than I ever intended it to be. And it's entirely directed towards me now. In the very beginning, the first day he showed up, I treated it like anyone would. I screamed at him to get the hell out of my house. Demanded to know who he was, what he was doing. Lied and said I had a gun. Needless to say, he wasn't intimidated. Not even a little. Why would he be? Now I recognize how stupid my expectations were back then. But I was completely ignorant to the unruly monster that had decided to make my home his. Where do I even start? The only reason I'm even able to be writing this is that he has allowed it. Everything I do goes through him first these days. The first week was the hardest by far. Back before I understood the true danger this thing was capable of. That was when I earned my first punishments. How do I even describe what happened to me? First off, what I did to earn it, it was the first week. The first day even. I was screaming my head off. Telling this perceived crackhead to get out of my living room and fast. When I had started my rants, he just looked on at me with this face of slight amusement. Standing there like an immovable wall. It pissed me off even more. How lax this stranger was. In my house. I swung at him. My fist made contact perfectly fine, which was expected. What wasn't anticipated by me was how little it affected the man in front of me. By little I mean, not at all. It did nothing to him. He didn't wince. It certainly didn't wipe that shit-eating grin off of his face. If anything, my feeble attempt to hurt this intruder fueled that stupid face of his. But something did happen. Something I only noticed moments later. That it wasn't anything to do with him. No, it was happening to me. In an instant I felt the most otherworldly pain spreading throughout the entirety of my lower face. My jaw felt as if the bone was on fire beneath my skin. My teeth all felt as if they were exploding inside of my mouth. My eyes were flowing like a waterfall from the pain. I felt as if my skull was melting inside of me. I didn't understand what had happened. How it was happening. Needless to say, it immediately diverted my attention. I ran into my bathroom, nearly tripping in the hallway over a added-up hoodie I had tossed from my last trip out to work. Still the only real moments of freedom I have to this day. Once I reached my goal, my bathroom mirror, I slammed the open cabinet shut and stared into the mirror, opening my mouth. What I saw, however, merely confused me. I was still in absolute agony. I was expecting to see a bunch of nails shoved through my gums. That's what it felt like anyway. But no, that wasn't the case. My teeth did look different. A little smaller, and a different shade than they had been previously. But I didn't understand. It's not like I could have understood in my current state anyway. It was hard to think much of anything while in that much pain. I didn't have to stand there in confusion for very long. However, I don't know if he manifested out from behind me or if he had simply walked from my living room to the bathroom and I hadn't noticed. I was a little preoccupied at the time. For what felt like an eternity, he just stared at me, studying me. I can't explain why, but it felt as if he was taking in every thought I was thinking, listening to words I wasn't speaking. Through the blistering pain in my face, I heard him. His calm, collected voice was the only clear thing I could perceive at the time, almost suffocating in its clarity. It's amazing how little humans know about their own bodies. As he spoke, he made it a point to look at me directly in the reflection of my eyes on the mirror, never breaking his contacts. It's painful, I know, but you need to learn how to behave yourself. I was still in agony, but despite the immense pain I was in, despite the sweat drenching my forehead, despite how white my fingertips had become as they clung to the edge of my sink for dear life, I listened. I listened like a captive audience member. He seemed to register the increasing urgency of my plight and cut to the chase. To be blunt, I took away your enamel. Not permanently. I'll give it back, don't you worry. Your enamel is crucial to your oral health. Keeps your teeth from being too delicate. 2. Sensitive. Most humans have some degree of enamel erosion, but did not a single trace of enamel at all. It's a different story. Anything can set them off right now. Even your own saliva. Even the heat from your own mouth is enough. Normally a biology lesson like that would be completely lost on me, but in that moment, I understood every word. Maybe not the specifics, but I understood enough. I understood that this thing that was in my house was not a man. It was not a human, and it could do things to me I couldn't even dream of. Terrible things. It was shortly after he finished his little mantra that he returned to my enamel. What that meant, I don't know. Was he holding it somewhere? Was it just an illusion? A trick he played on me? I don't know. I don't want to know. That was my first lesson. I didn't want any more. That first punishment was enough to stop me from screaming at him to get out of my house. That single event was enough for me to learn that if he was going to leave, it was going to be what he wanted. Not me. It wasn't enough to completely break me. That still hasn't happened yet. I've had many more punishments in the time after that first day. Some are more realistic. Ice baths. A simple slap here or there. Maybe a skipped meal or two. When I really screw up, that's when the scary shit happens. I don't know when this is going to end. I'm assuming it will end after my sentence is up. I really don't know. I don't even know if he's actually related to my sentence or if whatever he has just decided to show up at the worst time possible. I doubt it's a coincidence though. After all, it's the perfect time to torment someone like this. To make someone feel so utterly helpless in their own home. When I can't just leave. My only respite remains my job. It's hours a day. 5 days a week. To and from. Nowhere else. After that, it's off to home. With Warden. I've got more to say as is. And Warden certainly doesn't seem like he'll be leaving me alone anytime soon. So I'm sure I'll end up writing out a few of these. Unless of course Ward, and besides I'm no longer allowed. Me again. Things have been hectic after my last post. Thankfully Warden is still allowing me to write. Granted it took some convincing. He didn't appreciate how he came off in my previous post. He got upset with me. Very upset. It was easy to tell how pissed he was because he does this thing with his eyes. Warden looks like any other guy out there for the most part. Totally human, except for when it comes to his eyes. They're not neon red or anything. But when he gets pissed, they change. I didn't really have a proper word for it until recently. It's pretty similar to something parrots do people call penning. Basically when he's especially upset his pupils get super tiny. Like little black grains of sand. It's when I know I'm in deep shit. Whether he can do it the opposite way, I don't know. I've never seen him do that anyway. What would that even mean? If his pupils suddenly get super big and fill out his eyes, does that mean he's happy? I don't know. I'm still learning so much about whatever he is. I learn a little more every time I'm around him. I didn't notice it when we had our very first altercation. But like I said before, I was pretty distracted. He just stared with those tiny pinprick pupils. I now know that humans can do that under certain circumstances. Bright light, drugs, all that. However, with him it seems to be directly tied to his mood. He stared at me for a little while. Then he grabbed me by my hair. It was fast. I didn't have time to react. And I was still reeling from the sudden grab as he was dragging me off. I was in such a panic I wasn't even sure exactly where he was dragging me to. The next thing I knew I was out of my chair. Out of my bedroom. And in the kitchen. He never spoke a word the entire time. Not that I was trying to speak to him anyway. When he let me go, I just stood there in front of him rubbing at my head where he had been yanking. He seemed as if he was waiting for me to regain my composure. Once I did, he spoke to me rather matter-of-factly just like he always does. You shouldn't write about others so callously, Alec. It's rude, very unthoughtful. I'm the only one you have. Do you want to push the last person you have away? Do you want to be alone? Do you want to know what it's like to have no help? Do you want to know how it feels to have no one? To be useless? I will help with that. And it will be the last help I offer until you learn how to respect me. I wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that. And I learned it soon enough. The very moment he finished talking, everything disappeared. For a moment I thought maybe he sent me away to some awful vacuum in space. It sounded stupid, I know. But given the things he's shown himself to be capable of, can you really blame my mind for going in that direction? But No, that's not what happened. What happened was I had just completely lost my sight. No vision at all. As soon as I came to that realization, I reached up just to confirm that I at least still had eyeballs. I did. Thankfully. He spoke again. This time it was a much shorter and simple speech. Make me a sandwich. What? That's really all I could think in that moment. I was completely taken aback. He wanted me to. What? It was one of the few times I actually dared to talk back to him, instead of just quietly complying. It was just so strange. What? You want me to make you a sandwich? Why the hell do you want that? Do you even need to eat? I waited there quietly in the darkness, hoping he would respond and not be even more upset that I had dared to question him. He did respond, but his response left much to be desired. He simply repeated himself, just a bit slower and more condescending than the previous time, emphasizing each word to me, as if I had suddenly forgotten English. Make me a sandwich. I was still confused. Sure, I wasn't going to dare question him a second time. It was clear I wasn't going to get an answer, so I just complied. Or I tried at least. I tried my best to feel around for my countertop. It's a long counter that starts on one wall and wraps around to the other. I slowly shuffled to avoid tripping over anything or ramming my nose into a chair leg somewhere, not daring to lift my socks off of the tile floor. I must have looked like an absolute idiot. I sure felt like one. I managed to place both of my palms on the countertop without incident, and I simply shuffled along it almost like how a child shuffles along the edge of a pool when they can't swim in order to find my bread. My left hand finally smashed into the bag of honey wheat bread I had, and I grabbed it, pulling it closer. I fumbled around trying to find that stupid twisty thing the bags have. Annoying enough to deal with even with sight, let alone now. I took my sweet time getting 2 slices of bread out of the bag, lightly smashing them in the process. Once I had what I needed, I shoved the bag back towards the backboard and left the slices there as I continued my shuffling against the counter edge, searching for the lip of my kitchen sink. Once I felt its metal surface, I knew I was almost at the fridge and shuffled myself over to it, rubbing my hand up against the cold surface like a drunken pervert, trying to feel it up until I at long last found the damn handle. I didn't know what kind of sandwich Warden wanted. He didn't specify, and honestly, I doubt this actually had anything to do with hunger or an actual desire for us, in which he just wanted to watch me make an ass out of myself. I pulled the fridge open and bent down, grabbing around for a few seconds before finding the handle to my meat drawer and opening it up. I rummaged around in there and grabbed what was unmistakably a Tupperware of ham or turkey. I have both, so I had no clue which it was at the time. Once I had the squared Tupperware of undetermined meat, I held it in one hand as I groped around once more for a bag of cheese. I found that rather quickly, thankfully. I shoved the fridge closed and retraced my shuffling along the counter until I once again reached the halfway marker of my sink. I set the bag of cheese on top of the Tupperware of mystery meat and reached around for my knife block. Once I made contact, I grabbed a knife, couldn't tell which one, and continued my harrowing journey back to my bread on the other side of the kitchen. That was the hardest part of this massive waste of time. At least I thought it was. Assembling the sandwich was easy enough. Not my best work, but it was a sandwich. Barely. As soon as I finished sloppily cobbling together what only a newly blinded and, like me, could call us, and which Warden finally broke the endless awkward silence that I'd been forced to endure throughout this strenuous process with yet another simple command. Cut it. I was all too prepared for this action. I already had the knife. After all. Then I truly thought about it. I'm blind. How am I going to cut this thing without cutting my fingertips off? I wanted to tell him no, that I wasn't going to risk cutting myself for his bruised ego, but I knew that was a bad idea. Disobedience was a bad idea, so I just did my best, working oh so slowly, gently moving the knife down, trying to get a feel for where the sandwich was and where my hands were. Once I was certain I had my placement right and that my hand would be spared, I made the cut. I began sawing away at the Frankenstein, that little sandwich. And as I did, I felt an intense, deep stabbing pain. I was so confused. I was 100% positive that my hand was not in the way of my knife. I was positive that nothing is so simple with Warden around. No, the instant I began my sawing, Warden had swapped the sandwich with my knife, meaning that now instead of holding a knife as I sawed away at a sandwich, I was instead holding a sandwich as I brought my fist down, grinding the back of my hand against the serrated blade. As soon as the pain registered, I screamed out in agony and threw my hand back, shaking it frantically before clutching it tightly to my chest, curling down to the floor in pain. My hands were both soaked in what I didn't have to guess was blood, and I was in pain. Lots of it. As I laid there trying not to dare let any tears escape my pain-racked body, my vision returned. It was blurry with those tears threatening to break free. I could see Warden calmly walking forward until he stood right over me. Warden didn't say a thing. Not a single word. He simply reached down and picked up the sandwich, which at this point was half-stained crimson. As he stood back up, he lifted one of his shoes off of the ground and stepped onto my head, keeping me pinned as he took an all-too-proud bite of his snack. He kept me there until he finished. He didn't even look that down at me. He simply took his shoe off of the side of my face and allowed me to slowly sit up, still racked with the searing pain in my hand. Both of my hands were completely red, and there was a large red splotch on my shirt where I had been clutching my hand. The cut was deep. Not deep enough to see bone or anything, but it was deep. Nonetheless, I composed myself and scrambled to my feet. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I didn't want to go to the hospital. If I did, I'd have to leave right there and then. And my ankle monitor, and more importantly the people patrolling it, would be none too happy about that. I was about to run into my bathroom. I had a small emergency kit under my sink. I was hoping it would have some gauze or something to stop the bleeding, but I didn't get the chance to check because as soon as I attempted to pass Warden, he grabbed my wrist, the one of the actively bleeding hand, of course. Then he did something I didn't expect. Granted, I never expect anything he does, but this was especially unexpected. He didn't speak. He just stared at me as he pulled my hand closer to his face and held it up as he took one long, slow, repulsive lick of the back of my hand. And the pain was gone. The bleeding and the pain were both gone. My hands were still covered in blood, but I wasn't bleeding anymore. I wasn't cut anymore. It was gone. I had no scar, no evidence of that deep cut ever being there. Just a thick trail of skin showing through the mess of blood around it. I didn't know what to do at that point other than to quickly wipe the back of my newly healed hand against my pant leg. Luckily, I didn't have to think about what to do next because Warden spoke, and for once the direction that he gave I agreed with completely. Get out of my sight. Needless to say, some new guidelines have been set in place regarding my journaling. I'm permitted to continue describing the events I'd been living through as long as I never under any circumstances describe Warden appearance-wise. I can't tell you if he has hair, or if he does, what color it is. I can't tell you how tall he is. I can't tell you what his skin looks like. I may have already pushed it a little by stating earlier that his eyes were neon red. I'll have to wait and see about that. It seems that as long as he's sure no one is able to identify him, he's all right with me describing his various deeds against me as I document my experiences to you all. I suppose it's because he may feel like it won't come back on him in a way. Why he cares I don't really have an explanation for, other than maybe pure ego. I really don't see why it matters. With everything he seems capable of, I wouldn't put the ability to change his form out of the realm of possibilities. I won't question it though. It gives me permission to continue this, so I really don't need to know his whys. I didn't have much time to calm down after what happened since that was a work day. I barely had enough time to shower the blood off and change clothes. I doubted I'd ever be able to get those stains out, so I just tossed them. By the time I was dressed and had my shoes on, I was cutting it so close I had to run out of the door and into my car. The drive to work was quiet. It's only about a 15-minute commute, but even that short drive gave me a moment to collect myself. I blasted myself with the AC and turned up the radio and just breathed. I wish those drives lasted forever, before Warden showed up and started his tyranny. I hated the drive to work. I hated the roads I had to take. Hated the view. The same buildings, every day, reminding me how much closer I was to the job I hated. These days I practically worship those moments. I treat my heavily driven junker of a car like it's my salvation most days. I treat my dead-end retail job like it's my heaven. Because Warden isn't there. Sure, I still have to deal with assholes, and in far greater numbers, but none of them can make me blind in an instant or trick me into slashing myself. Even on days when half of my coworkers are out sick, and I'm left keeping the place running, I'm still thankful that I'm not home. Most of my coworkers avoid me like the plague, but I have a small group I get along with well enough. There's Greg. He's an older guy. He's a little crude, but he's a good guy most of the time. Then there's Alma. Seeing her always makes me feel better. Her blonde hair is always in the most beautiful curls. She's roughly the same age as me, but she has way more energy than I do. She's the one the customers flock to 9 times out of 10. Obviously, I can't talk to them about what's going on. Not because Warden has specifically forbidden it. It's just, what exactly would I even say? That's probably why he hasn't outright told me not to. He already knows I can't do that. That day was slow. Thankfully, I just spent the whole day stocking the shelves in my departments. The food department. I usually like to imagine preparing and eating whatever it is I'm stocking. Just the product of a bored mind, I guess. But that day all I could think of was the events of that morning. Most thoughts I had these days have something to do with Warden. He's like a disease, and I'm definitely infected. I'll write more as soon as I get the chance. I would say I'll write more about the things he's done in the past. But, with the recent events, I have a feeling he's going to be doing a whole lot to me now more than ever. It's been a little while since my last entry. I meant to continue sooner, but something happened, and I wasn't really sure how to explain it. I'm still not sure I even want to, or if I even understand what happened fully. I've just sort of been dealing with Warden as usual, just going through the motions. I just don't know what to think. I still don't quite think I'm ready to write it out just yet. I figured maybe if I write about some other stuff, that'll sort of hype myself up a little. Things were normal enough right after my last entry. Warden didn't get too upset about it, thankfully. It really seems like as long as I don't give out his details, he doesn't care that much. I had a couple of incidents since then, but they were nothing too awful. The first happened about a week after that last update. I can remember I was in the living room trying to watch some TV before bed. Work was killer that day. I didn't even notice him at first, but then he was just sitting beside me. He couldn't have walked over. I didn't hear any footsteps. He was just there now. I didn't feel like bringing it up, questioning him, or anything else like that, especially not after the day I had. He just sat there quietly watching the TV. He didn't look over at me, and I tried to do the same. But there's just something about Warden, something that pulls you in. Before I knew it, I was just staring at him. Neither of us said anything for what felt like forever. It was super awkward, and all I wanted to do was just leave the room and leave him to the TV. But I couldn't. I couldn't move at all. It felt hard to even blink. I'm still not sure if it was some weird reaction his presence caused my body, or if it was something he was doing to me. After what I can only assume was a few minutes, I was finally able to blink and break free. I shut my eyes, which felt like they had been dipped in hot deserts, and by that point, I kept my eyes closed for a moment and turned my head back in the direction of the TV. Only when I opened my eyes, what I saw instead was a bookshelf. I was confused. I didn't even have a bookshelf in my living room. I looked around my living room, and the longer I did, the more I realized that I wasn't in my living room. I was in someone's living room, but it wasn't mine. I was still sitting on a couch, but this couch was a deep maroon color. Mine was light brown. This couch had white throw pillows. I wasn't nearly fancy enough for throw pillows. In front of me was a tall wooden bookshelf. There were only a few books in it, though. Most of it was filled with little porcelain knickknacks and trinkets. I took a moment to breathe and stood up. I wasn't really sure what else to do. I was so caught off guard that I hadn't even thought about asking Warden what was going on. I hadn't even bothered to look back at him until right then. And when I did, he was gone. Honestly, I expected as much. Of course, he'd send me to some stranger's house and just dump me there. It did raise a lot of questions for me. Besides the obvious anyway. I mean, if I really was in someone else's house, then surely my ankle monitor would be going off and I'd be getting a call, right? But that never happened. I'm not sure if Warden can affect my monitor or something. There doesn't seem to be anything he can't do, but it still made me wonder if there was another answer. Maybe he didn't mess with my monitor at all. Maybe I was still in my home, and I was just hallucination. Maybe it was all an illusion. I took a few steps around the living room, just getting my bearings. The floor was hardwood like mine, but it was a darker color, and there was a plush red carpet under my feet. It felt pretty nice, actually. I kept looking around and brainstorming about what exactly was going on. I got one idea I felt particularly strong on. Maybe this was my house, but just a different point in time. Maybe he had sent me backward in time. Maybe even forward. I wasn't really sure how to prove or disprove that other than seeing if the layout matched. I mean, people could add and take away walls, but in general the house should still be the same shape, right? That was my first thought, so that's what I did. I was just slowly walking around this weird house to see if the rooms matched up with mine, while also silently praying that there wasn't anyone else in here. Besides Warden anyway. Oddly enough, in these sorts of situations, Warden is a sight I'm actually thankful for. Maybe that's why he does it. Try and make me feel helpless and like I need him. I didn't venture very far. I just looked around the living room and then poked my head out of it. There was a hallway on the east, and a kitchen straight ahead. Bingo. Certainly seemed like the same layout as my house. The front door was where it always is. And it was black now. Mine has always been white. So this was sort of my house. Maybe it was an alternate version of my house. Maybe it wasn't even in the same reality as I was in before. I felt slightly more comfortable somehow, so I just kept cautiously walking around. Maybe this was where Warden lived. Maybe it's where he came from. Or where he goes when I can't find him. Some of these colors don't really match. I don't think Warden is very good with interior design. I won't dare tell him that though. I still didn't know exactly where I was. I still don't. Not really. But I was a little more comfortable with the idea that this was at least kind of my house. Once that was settled, I focused less on trying to figure out where I was and more on where the hell Warden was. I checked around the place, room by room. I checked my bedroom. Oddly enough, instead of having different furniture in there, it didn't have any furniture at all. No bed, no desk or computer, nothing. That was particularly weird to me. Why my bedroom of all rooms? Why is it empty? I didn't know then why it was empty, and I still haven't figured that part out yet. Maybe he hates me so much that he can't even bear making a knockoff version of my room. I do stay there the most. I was just going to leave since there wasn't anything to look at, but then I took note of the fact that while my blinds were missing, the window was still there. That gave me idea to try, see if the outside world was still the same. It would help knock off some of my theories as to what and or where this place is. I stepped further into the empty, hollow-feeling room to the window. It didn't even have wallpaper. It looked almost unfinished. Random patches of white against the gray soulless walls. I stepped up to the window and put my hands on the edge. When I did, I winced and moved back because I got a splinter stuck in my finger. I hadn't noticed just how worn down the wood was compared to the window in my world. It was natural wood. Old and almost shattered looking. My window's wood was painted white and not, well, decrepit. I planned on pulling the sucker out, but I needed to satisfy my curiosity first. I looked around out the window. The first thing I noticed is that it was a bright day out there, whereas it was night in my world. I wasn't really sure what I was hoping to find out there. What I was used to seeing was the tall brown wooden fence separating my house from my neighbors. What I saw instead was not much of anything. There was dirt and then there was sky. There were no houses, no fences, no trees. Not even grass. I was nowhere. It didn't entirely dispel my "is this the past?" or my "is this the future?" theories, but it made the alternate reality one much more plausible in my mind. It was just weird to look at. I kept just staring out there looking for anything out of place, but there was nothing. There were no roads. There were no sidewalks. There weren't even rocks in the dirt. It was just a flat plain of grass, less dirt. There were no hills. There were no clouds. Even stranger was the fact that I couldn't find the sun. It was bright out there, but the light didn't seem to have a direct point of origin like it normally did. There was no sun, but there was light. There was light, but no shadows. It seemed like all of the light around was coming from straight above, like some sort of stage light. Maybe it really was where Warden lives. It certainly fit his uncanny aesthetic. Maybe Warden was even considered a normal person in this world. If there even were other people in this world. It seemed like I was the only life in that place. Maybe that meant something. If Warden had come from this place, it would be a little weird that he'd be the only living thing here. Maybe he isn't a living being at all. Though if he's not a living being, how does he move? How does he speak? Or breathe? Any brief hopes I had at understanding Ward, it's just the tiniest bit better, were quickly knocked out of me. I can't tell you how long I stood there staring out of that window. What I can say is that I must have been staring out there daydreaming for a while, because when Warden finally decided to grab my shoulder and jolt me out of my daze, my legs were aching like I had just gotten off one of my 8-hour shifts stocking everything from flour to drain cleaner. He didn't really say anything. I didn't either. Not just because I didn't know what to say, but because my throat was just so dry. It hurt just trying to open it at all. I stood there staring at him for a moment after he scared me with his touch. Then I turned back to the window. When I did, however, the outside was back to what it had always been. Lightly dying grass, a tall brown wooden fence, a sidewalk, a road. The street lights were there and beaming. All right where it was supposed to be. My blinds were back. So was my wallpaper. He brought me back from that place even faster than he had taken me there. I don't know how long I was there. I stepped over to my computer and turned it on, slightly scared, but thankfully it was the same day and year as I had left. It seemed like I had only been gone for about 3 hours at that point. Even if I had been standing in place and staring that entire time, it was still weird how tired that place made me. Despite how tired I was, the only real evidence I had left this world at all was that tiny brown splinter still stuck in my finger. I still keep that little thing on my desk today, just as a reminder to myself that I'm not crazy. I wanted to go grab some water or something to ease the discomfort in my throat. I was just too exhausted to bother with it. I slumped down onto my bed. I'll be honest. That was probably the best night of sleep I gotten in a long while. I think I'm ready to say what I need to say. I don't want to dwell on it too long, so I think I'm just going to keep it brief and simple. That morning, I woke up. Normally when I wake up, Warden is either on the couch or just nowhere at all. But that morning he wasn't. That morning, he was in my bed with me.